Before compact discs, before MTV, before the 80s rewrote the rulebook, 1978 was a year when rock and roll stood at a crossroads. Radio stations spun disco hits alongside guitar-driven anthems, and somewhere between the FM dial and the vinyl bins at your local record store, 10 albums quietly changed everything. Let's bring them back, starting with number 1. Number 10 takes us to Boston, where the Cars rolled into the national consciousness with their self-titled debut. Released in June of 1978, this album wasn't just new wave, it was a blueprint for the next decade. Producer Roy Thomas Baker, fresh from Queen's operatic epics, stripped everything down to crisp guitars, synthesizer hooks, and Rick Ocasek's deadpan delivery. Songs like Just What I Needed and My Best Friend's Girl climbed to number 27 and number 35 respectively on the Billboard Hot 100. But here's what most people forget. This wasn't a fluke. The album stayed on the charts for 139 weeks, eventually selling 6 million copies. The Cars proved you could be weird, angular, and catchy all at once, paving the way for everyone from the Strokes to Franz Ferdinand decades later. Number 9 is a record that rock critics initially dismissed, but time has proven them spectacularly wrong. Nostalgic Van Halen's self-titled debut exploded onto Los Angeles radio in February of 1978, and nothing sounded quite like Eddie Van Halen's two-handed tapping on Eruption. The technique wasn't entirely new, but Eddie made it sound like a spaceship landing in your living room. David Lee Roth's acrobatic vocals on Runnin' with the Devil and their cover of the Kinks' You Really Got Me announced a new era of arena rock excess. Producer Ted Templeman, who'd worked with the Doobie Brothers, reportedly recorded most of the album in just 3 weeks for about $40,000. It peaked at number 19 on the Billboard 200, but became a 10 times platinum monster, fundamentally changing how guitarists approach their instrument for the next 40 years. At number 8, we find an album born from heartbreak and cocaine-fueled paranoia. Warren Zevon's Excitable Boy hit shelves in January of 1978, and beneath the dark humor lay some of the sharpest songwriting of the decade. Werewolves of London became the hit everyone remembers, with its howling chorus and piano riff that would later be borrowed by Kid Rock. But deep cuts like Rollin' the Headless Thompson Gunner told stories of mercenaries in Africa with journalistic precision. Jackson Browne and Waddy Wachtel helped produce this album, and the Eagles' entire rhythm section basically played on it. Reflective Zevon's literary approach to rock and roll, mixing Graham Greene-style adventure with Raymond Chandler cynicism, influenced everyone from Bruce Springsteen to the Drive-By Truckers. The album went gold, but Zevon's demons would chase him for decades. His legacy, proof that rock songs could be as complex as short stories. If you're loving this trip through forgotten records, hit subscribe. We've got more stories from rock's golden age coming every week. Number 7 brings us to the intersection of punk attitude and pop sensibility, Blondie's Parallel Lines. Love is so confusing, there's no peace of mind. Produced by Mike Chapman in the summer of 1978, took a New York punk band and gave them global hit-making power. Heart of Glass, that shimmering disco-rock hybrid, hit number 1 in the United States and the United Kingdom, while One Way or Another became an eternal anthem of obsessive love. What made this album special wasn't just Debbie Harry's icy cool vocal delivery or Chris Stein's sharp guitar work. It was the band's willingness to absorb everything around them, disco, reggae, pop, punk, and make it sound effortlessly cohesive. Chapman, who'd produced the Sweet and Susie Quattro, brought a gloss that some punk purists hated but radio programmers loved. The album sold 20 million copies worldwide and proved that punk's anti-establishment energy could coexist with hit singles. Madonna, Gwen Stefani, and countless others studied this playbook religiously. Number 6 is an album that almost no one heard in 1978, but its influence ripples through alternative rock to this day. Big Star's Third Sister Lovers was recorded in 1974, but didn't see proper release until 1978, thanks to label dysfunction and Alex Chilton's deteriorating mental state during the sessions. Producer Jim Dickinson watched as Chilton, drinking heavily and battling depression, created something haunting and beautiful. Songs like Holocaust and Kangaroo sound like they're coming apart at the seams, with strings swelling behind Chilton's fragile voice. By most accounts, only 2,000 copies sold initially. Radio wouldn't touch it, critics were confused, but Remem, The Replacements, Teenage Fan Club, Elliott Smith, and Wilco all cited this album as foundational to their sound. Sometimes the most important records are the ones nobody buys. They're the ones that whisper secrets to future generations, changing everything without anyone noticing. At number 5, we find Bruce Springsteen at his most uncompromising. Darkness on the Edge of Town arrived in June of 1978. After a 3-year legal battle that kept the boss off the road and out of the studio. Producer John Landau helped Springsteen craft 10 songs about working-class desperation, failed dreams, and the thin line between getting out and getting trapped. There were no saxophones soaring toward hope this time, just Clarence Clemens' restrained playing and guitars that sounded like they were rusting in real time. Badlands, The Promised Land, and Racing in the Street became live staples, but the album peaked at only number 5 on the Billboard 200. Why does it matter more than Born to Run? Because this is where Springsteen stopped writing about escape and started writing about survival. John Mellencamp, Arcade Fire, and the Gaslight Anthem built entire careers from these blueprints. This album taught rock and roll that you didn't need a happy ending, you just needed the truth. Number 4 proves that jazz fusion and rock and roll could get married and have incredibly talented children. Steely Dan's Aja, released in September of 1977, but dominating 1978 with its chart presence and Grammy wins, represented perfectionism taken to beautiful extremes. Donald Fagen and Walter Becker spent months crafting 7 songs, hiring session musicians like Steve Gadd, Wayne Shorter, and Larry Carlton to execute impossibly complex arrangements. The title track alone required 52 takes before Becker and Fagen were satisfied. Producer Gary Katz watched as the duo spent over a year in the studio, burning through hundreds of thousands of dollars. The album hit number 3 on the Billboard 200 and went platinum 5 times over, proving that audiences would embrace sophistication if you didn't talk down to them. Radiohead, Kanye West, and countless hip-hop producers have sampled these grooves because Steely Dan understood something fundamental. The more precise the musicianship, the deeper the emotional impact. They made Studio Obsession sound cool. Number 3 takes us to London, where the past and future of rock collided. The Clash's Give 'Em Enough Rope dropped in November of 1978, and suddenly punk rock had arena-sized ambitions. Producer Sandy Pearlman, who'd worked with Blue Oyster Cult, gave Joe Strummer and Mick Jones a bigger, more American sound that some UK fans initially rejected. Songs like Safe European Home and Tommy Gun tackled British colonialism and international terrorism with 3-chord urgency. The album hit number 2 in the UK but stalled at number 128 in America. The breakthrough would come later with London Calling. So why include it here? Because this is where the Clash learned they could be political, aggressive, and accessible simultaneously. Without this transitional album, we wouldn't have gotten their masterpiece a year later. Green Day, Rancid, and the entire melodic hardcore movement studied these songs like sacred texts. This album proved punk could grow up without selling out. At number 2, we encounter an album that redefined what Southern rock could sound like. The Marshall Tucker Band's Together Forever arrived in April of 1978, blending country, jazz, and rock with a sophistication that the Allman Brothers hinted at but never fully explored. Toy Caldwell's guitar and flute work on tracks like Love is a Mystery created soundscapes that felt simultaneously rootsy and cosmic. Producer Paul Hornsby, who'd worked with the Charlie Daniels Band, captured a band at the absolute peak of their powers. The album went gold, but by most accounts, this represents the last moment before lineup changes and tragedy would fracture the group. What changed? The Marshall Tucker Band proved Southern rock didn't have to be about volume and rebellion, it could be about space, groove, and emotional nuance. The jam band movement of the 90s, from Widespread Panic to the Dave Matthews Band, drew directly from this well. This album whispered when others shouted, and that restraint became its greatest strength. And now, number 1, the album that truly changed everything in 1978, yet somehow remains criminally underrated.
While the dealers, they get together, then they decide who gets the breaks.
Dire Straits' self-titled debut, released in October of 1978, introduced the world to Mark Knopfler's finger-picked guitar tone and storytelling that felt like short films set to music. Recorded on a shoestring budget at Basing Street Studios in London, producer Muff Winwood captured lightning in a bottle with Sultans of Swing, a song about a tired jazz band playing to an empty pub that became an international phenomenon. The single climbed to number 4 in the United States and number 8 in the UK, but the album's impact went far beyond chart positions. What made Knopfler different? He rejected distortion, power chords, and rock and roll cliches in favor of clean tones, jazz-influenced phrasing, and narratives about ordinary people. In a year dominated by disco and punk's raw fury, here was an album that said rock could be subtle, literary, and technically brilliant without being progressive rock pretentious. Eredimus erect Prasal de Kraldampsu after hearing Sultans of Swing, asking how he got that tone. The album eventually sold millions, but in 1978, it was the underdog that redefined what guitar heroes could sound like. John Mayer, the Black Keys, and every indie band that prizes restraint over volume owes a debt to this record. Dire Straits proved you could whisper and still be heard around the world. 1978 wasn't just about Saturday Night Fever and Grease dominating the box office. It was about these 10 albums spinning on turntables in bedrooms and college dorms, quietly reshaping what rock and roll could be. Some exploded into mainstream consciousness. Others took decades to find their audience. But every single one proved that the greatest music doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it slips in through the back door and changes everything without anyone noticing until years later. 45 years on, these albums sound just as vital, just as revolutionary, just as necessary as they did when vinyl was king and radio was the only way to discover magic. Which song hit you hardest today? Drop your memories in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the decades that changed music forever.